All
Right.
right, we're all set. Everything's clean. We have some people joining us. That's awesome.
Oh, that's so great. I love it.
Hello, Kelly and Jennifer. We see you there.
Hello.
Good to
Hello,
see you.
Kelly. Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. We're so excited, and we're hoping more people will join us. Otherwise, we would love to just have this conversation. This is a way for Tiffany and I to help people move through these difficult conversations around race. We are doing these so far they've been on a weekly basis. This is our first live. So we're hoping we can add some value and help people move through these difficult conversations.
Yeah. And we'll drop, we're going to drop our business cards too in the chat. So some people will be joining us live, and then we will also have that available for after because we're recording it. So that way people can connect with us. You can connect with us on LinkedIn or our email address too.
Yeah. So I think one of the best ways for us to start, Tiffany, if you're okay with that, is just do a really quick recap about some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past couple of sessions that we've done. And so when we first started this journey, it was a conversation about how do we start this conversation around race. And some of the things that we talked about is to make sure that we're doing it for the right reason, and that the conversations when you're showing up, that you are making a priority and making it a priority in the fact that you are going to continue showing up. It's not one conversation and done. And so that's, I think, one of the really big things in starting these conversations. I think the next thing that we talked about, which was really a difficult thing, is accepting and understanding that everyone is coming to the conversation at a different point. Some people are just starting this journey into understanding why these conversations have to happen. Some are in the middle of their journey. But we all have to be respectful about where we are in these, in our own self journey in having these conversations. Of course, the biggest thing is always be respectful, right? Again, because of where we're coming from, where our perspectives are and our lenses are, always be respectful. That's the only way to have conversations continue. And then I think the last thing we talked about was self-care. It's very difficult to have these conversations. They're emotional, they're triggering, they're very difficult. People are being pushed into comfort zone, into discomfort. So be aware of where you are and take the time to step back before you re-enter the conversations.
Yeah, it's a great recap.
Thanks. I think then the next thing to recap, if you don't mind, is talking about from an HR perspective, what sort of things are available to employees at the workplace when having these, in dealing with the conversations and the teams.
Yeah, so with recognition that not every companies are on their own journey as well. So they may be in a different place. Some companies have publicly stated what their position is, and we recognize that some may not have done that yet. And so that can be a very delicate balance and can be difficult for people to know, oh, is this okay to talk about in the workplace? I think that in general, it can be difficult. Is this an okay conversation to have in the workplace? So employees do have rights, and they don't necessarily have to not talk about that. And from an engagement perspective, you also want people bringing their whole selves to work. And we live in the skin that we're in, and so we can't change that. And we want to build inclusive environments, and part of that is allowing these conversations to happen as leaders, setting time that we talked about before on previous broadcast, to say, make space and make time for people and for the matter, not leaving those elephants in the room, and being open to hearing the conversation. That's a great way to start that. There's also employee assistance plans. So EAPs, we lovingly call them, and I always put in my shameless HR plug because they're frankly an underutilized free employee benefit. Now, not all employers offer that, but many do. It's confidential. Your employer won't know that you've called in. And so sometimes if there's no space in the workplace to talk about it, or you're uncomfortable or uncertain as to whether the employer will be okay with that, then, there's outside of our family and friends, obviously we want to continue those conversations outside of the workplace. But from an employer perspective, that's another way that you can have that conversation, be provided with community resources and someone to talk to. And your employer will not find out that you called or when you called or what those topics are. I always, because I am an HR professional, I'm also going to shamelessly plug your HR department. Now, again, not every organization has those, but if you have someone in leadership that you're comfortable talking to and they're receptive to that, or your HR professional, certainly reach out to them, especially if it's delicate and you don't know how to necessarily have that conversation. As HR professionals, we're well equipped. We're used to having sticky conversations, and these are sticky conversations. So definitely leverage that if you can as well.
Yep, sounds great. And then last week we talked about the question that came up last week was, I want to have the conversations, but I'm afraid to have the conversations, right? What if I say the wrong things? And you and I talked a bit about that. I think the biggest takeaway from that was, what is your purpose in starting the conversation, right? If your purpose is to genuinely learn and become an ally, that's one thing, and that's the thing that you want. But if your purpose is just to do it because, well, that's the trend now and everyone else is doing it, you can just stay home. Like, that is not a conversation to have, right?
Right.
It's not added value. Nothing's happening to it. This is not a trend. This is serious business, and this is serious conversation that's putting people into difficult emotional positions. So I think that was the biggest takeaway, is understanding your purpose in wanting to start the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And it's, we talked about doing the work too. So it's, along with meeting people where they're at and where they're on their journey, it's making sure that you as an individual are being inclusive in the things you say, think before you speak. And again, you're not always going to know the right thing to say. What is the right thing? Everybody's journey is different. As a person of color, people receive things differently. And some people may say, I'm too exhausted for that today. Some people may not be open to the conversation at all. And some people might be somewhere in the middle. And so I think on both sides of the conversation, it's coming from a place of assuming positive intent and really wanting to know for the right reasons. We all have status or curiosities that we want to satisfy at times, and that's okay too, provided that you're asking in a respectful way and that you're being mindful about the purpose and that your intent is pure. Typically, even if you do stumble along the way, that's okay, because people will usually be open to saying, okay, I had that over the weekend. I had a couple situations and it got a little sticky, but we can, you can often recover from those by just stating what your intent was, even if the person didn't receive it as you meant it. So that's really, really important. And we all have work to always do on ourselves. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, great. Those are great points. Thanks. Didn't know if anyone had any questions. I know we received a couple of questions through email and Messenger, but I didn't know if there were any questions from Jennifer or Kelly, and I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but if not, we are happy to answer some of the questions that we did receive.
I actually do have a question, if that's okay.
Absolutely,
yes,
Jennifer.
So I have lately just been hearing the term virtue signaling, and whether that is, happens at an individual level, like, hey, I'm not one of those white people, like those white people. I want to have the conversation, and then there's also at the, it's in terms of the workplace, just as a company, how a company is putting themselves out there. Because like you were saying just a few moments ago, Suman, about this is not a trend, and I have seen so many companies, just in the past month or so, put out statements about racism, and I work for a parenting resource, and putting out a statement, everybody feels like they have to do it. And I think it is sometimes just because people think, well, I have to do this now because it is the trend. And so I think maybe my question, it's a little bit twofold. Bear with me, please. So number one, I would like to understand a bit more about virtue signaling, because as a white person, although in a way I don't identify as white because I'm Jewish. And so I feel like I'm a Jew who can pass as white in a way. But as a white person, you know, just visually, how can I in the workplace or just in general approach people of color um, to say, well, I'm not one of those white people, or what can I do, or what is the best way to, I guess it's a delicate balance, to be there, to show up, to express the desire to have not only difficult conversations, but to actually build really strong relationships without coming across as like, well, yeah, I'm not one of those white people, and doing the whole virtue signaling. I think I'm trying to understand that concept a little more. But then also, and I'm sorry, this is like, I'm throwing a lot at you guys.
No, it's all
No, it's great.
Again, like as a company, as a business, how do you also kind of put it out there that you're basically putting your money where your mouth is behind the statement, from all the way at the HR level and systemically throughout your organization, but also as a company, putting yourself out there in public to, you know, like, how do we make those statements and those commitments not ring hollow? Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. A lot. Good
It
question.
is good stuff.
Thanks,
though.
Jennifer. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Tiffany, you want to start?
I can speak to, I guess I can touch on both points, and
Yep.
you know, more specifically in the HR realm, because that's what I do. I would say, you know, back to my comment about pure intent, that if you're coming from a place of pure intent, I don't think you necessarily have to say, hey, I'm not one of those white people. I think that your intent, you know, when we talk about virtue signaling, your intent should come through, provided that the messaging is okay. And I think sometimes even starting with a curious question and saying, is it okay if I talk to you about this? Or I have some questions about this, and making it known that you want to meet that person where they're at, and that you don't want to, you know, overstep boundaries, that if they're not comfortable, I think putting that disclaimer out there, because right when you walk into that conversation, you don't know if people are comfortable. And maybe someone like me, who typically is very open to these conversations, when you have them more and more, it becomes very exhausting. And I've dealt with some things that can be difficult. And so I think meeting the person where they're at, signaling your intent, and you know, stating, if you're not comfortable, we can have this conversation at another time. I want you to know that I support you, I'm here for you. I think that to me, and everybody's different, everybody has their barometer, for me that's enough. And I think that's one thing. When it comes to organizations, and I'm very passionate about this piece, because we do, Jennifer, see, to your point, a lot of things being put out there internally and external facing. And what happens sometimes is that we do it as a reaction versus a program, a strategy, really having it stick. In order to have it stick, you have to have the right intent. And so one of the things I talked about in one of Suman and I's previous talks is employer resource groups. And so, you know, those might be different groups geared towards men or women or people of color. And so that those are groups that you can use as a resource, and maybe even touching base with one of them to sit down with someone and have a conversation, because they typically are in that diversity, equity, inclusion space, and are more savvy and understand, you know, kind of what some of those, because there are triggers, there could be triggers for people. So that can be another resource within an organization. We have to meet those organizations where they're at, but just putting something out, it's better than not saying something. But at the same time, people will see if it's not genuine, and they'll see if it's not typically how the behaviors are of the organization, or they may see that as disingenuous if it's just stuck up now because of all these racial injustices that have been going on. So it's something that definitely needs to be tied to a strategy, and it should be very thoughtful and planful. One of the other things that you sometimes see is asking people of color to kind of take on this charge and to be the spokesperson for the organization or for the employer resource group. So that can be problematic as well. So I think it's a whole structure that's how you really make impact, and that's how it's long lasting, so that you build the right culture of inclusivity and diversity within the organization.
Yep, and I wholeheartedly agree with what Tiffany said. I think going back to that question about how do you have the conversation with someone, your first question, which was, how do I have that conversation? And I think another thing that Tiffany and I talked about is when you approach someone, it's the question that you ask them and how you ask that question. So for example, if you're interested in finding out more about something that you read in a book, and you want to have that conversation, I think a good way to start about it is, hey, so I have some questions about a book here's a book that I read. I have some questions. Is this a good time for us to have this conversation? Would you be willing to share your thoughts about it? I think it's that approach to make sure that they are comfortable and it's the right time. Because like Tiffany and I have been talking about, we're all at such a different point in our journeys. Some people are done. Some people are towards the end and super frustrated. They don't want anything to do with having more conversation, because these conversations could be that they've had so many and they've fallen flat, right? And then there are other people who are still, I always say I come from a place of education. So even though I'm exhausted and done with answering the same questions over and over again, it's a place that I come from, that place of education. So I continue to be willing to show up and answer the questions that I might have already answered 1,000 times. But I think it's how you ask that question and how you approach the person that's really key. And then talking about companies, it's a really interesting conversation, because Tiffany and I were actually talking about this, a similar situation right before we came on. Yes, a lot of companies are putting these out there, and as Tiffany said, having a strategic plan and how you continue the conversation is really important. And I think another point is that we as consumers, or we as employees, whatever your title is in association with that company, is to hold the company's feet to the fire. So if you have said you're going to do something, it's imperative that we keep them accountable, right? And so yes, everyone is jumping on this bandwagon. There are actually companies, and so what Tiffany and I were talking about, there are companies who have decided not to put anything out there, right? And have said, we don't get involved in politics. Race is not our place to have, in the workplace, it's not who we are. It's not part of our culture. And actually that was another question that was brought up, is how do you deal with a small business or a company who has said, we're not putting a statement out because we don't believe it's our place. We have a business to run and we don't believe it's our place. And so the two questions, I think, come together in answering that. And so some of the things that Tiffany and I talked about is, well, it's quite true. You are the business owner. You can do what you want to do, right? Wholeheartedly agree. That is your prerogative. But by not stating something, what does that do to your morale, to the morale of the company and to your employees, right? You get a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance, a lot of frustration, and that's just going to trickle down into work product, connections and relationships with your coworkers. And so we urge businesses not to just look at that picture of, well, this is a race conversation only and we're not getting in that field and into that conversation. We urge you to look at what that impact has on the rest of your employees and the rest of the company, and what does that trickle down effect look like, which at the end of the day is your bottom line, right? Are your deadlines going to be met? Are employees going to quit? And now you have to find someone else, which takes time, resources, and money. So companies like talking bottom line. So look at that bottom line and really determine if it's of value to you. And again, not putting out just a statement because people are putting out a statement, but to take the time to come up with a strategy that talks about how we're going to move this through the next 6 months, the next year. What are we going to provide to our employees as resources in continuing these conversations?
Yeah.
Jennifer, I don't know if that answered some of your questions or not.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much just for your comprehensive answers. And everybody is, I think, just trying to make sense of it and figure out how to do their best. And so the work that you both are doing is wonderful. And so thank you so, so much. Because I think it is confusing for a lot of people, and it's hard to sometimes make that connection between, making a statement and having the good intention, but then how are you actually going to do the deep work? And how are you actually going to come up with a strategy and build it into the entire system of your company? And then, like you said, at the individual level, just how you approach people, it's so important, as opposed to, just kind of randomly walking up to somebody of color and being like, hey, I'm here. Like, hey, I'm not one of them. But actually, having a genuine interaction and asking for that permission, or just asking, just kind of seeing it. This is super, super helpful. And thank you both for this incredibly, incredibly important work that you're doing.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks for joining us and for keeping the conversation alive and bringing your questions and your thoughts. It's really important when we talk about continuing the conversation, because it is a continuation. It's going to be a lot of hard work. It already has been. Suman and I alone, every week we come and we do this, plus, with everyone. And then we have, our other prep calls and things like that. But it is important. And I think, you brought up some really good points, Jennifer. And I'll echo off of a lot of what Suman said too, because what happens if you just are silent, or you're just like jumping on the bandwagon and throwing something out there, people can feel other than, and that's not an inclusive environment. It's not, to her points about productivity and turnover. Turnover is expensive. You hired good people for a reason. So you don't want to make the mistake of letting your silence send a message that you never intended to send. Similarly, if you are putting out messaging, what does that look like, and what is your intent? It has to be very strategic. And I am such a stickler for strategy, because you should never do anything just because for the sake of doing it. Even, when it comes to employee engagement, these conversations lead into that. And sometimes people just say, oh, we're going to have some fun activities and bring some popcorn in and things, and it's not stuck to a strategy. That doesn't mean that people feel like they're still getting the support in the workplace that they need. So super critical to always have these conversations. And I'm a huge advocate for never leaving elephants in the room. Suman and I started pulling them out. We're pulling them out of the room. Let's have this open dialogue and just get them out.
And that is great, because I know some people who have been in the diversity education arena for many, many years, like the last 20 years. And they're frustrated because as they've tried to work with companies over the last 20 years, they want to do some of the deep work, but then at a certain point, there's like a hitch, because whoever's in charge is like, wait a minute, we can't go that deep. Like, it's gonna cause tension, and it's gonna be uncomfortable. And so I'm hearing people, again, doing some of the work, who have been doing some of the work, saying, like, now is really the time to go deep, to actually do this work, because otherwise you have people in companies who don't feel welcome, and they're like, okay, here's just another workshop, here's another diversity trainer coming in, but we're not really going to see any change. And so I remain hopeful that now, like, there's truly enough momentum that the deep work can actually be done, so that people ultimately do feel welcome in their workplaces. So again, thank you.
Yeah, great points. Thanks for being so honest about your conversation, because if we're not honest about it, then that deep work can't happen. And then people aren't able to share their opinions and the impact that things are having on them.
And I think also it goes back to holding the company's feet to the fire, right? It's that if you're at a point and that next level of conversation goes deeper, and the employees want that and they feel it's important, people need to voice it and say, go to your HR, go to your your leadership and say, hey, we need to go deeper. Everyone does these general diversity conversations and workshops. Can we get something that's a little bit deeper? Is it going to push us out of our comfort zone? Absolutely. But can we also then have resources available to us that'll help us push through that discomfort, you know?
Right.
And I think employees really do have a lot of power when it comes to dealing with the leadership and with their employees, especially again, if you talk the bottom line to dollars to companies, right? And you talk about what that retention rate looks like and the money that goes if they were to leave. And I'm not saying be threatening at all, but that's definitely an approach, is to say we need to go deeper and it's important. And I think also the hiring process needs to change a bit. And I'm not only talking about bringing people of color into leadership positions, but more that who are you hiring? What are their values? You know, I read a very interesting conversation about, do you put protests on your resume, right? Or your civil work that you're doing or volunteering stuff. Should that come on your resume? I mean, it's this very sticky question.
Wow.
But there's a part of me that says, yes, because that speaks to who you are and what kind of changes and how you're involved in your community and involved in those changes. So there's a part of me that says, I think a lot of the hiring process and the questions that are being asked also need to change, so that you are bringing people who want to have these deeper conversations, who are involved in these social changes, or working towards social changes, who are part of your staff and your teams.
That is a stellar point.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that article, and then I'll post it. I'll figure out where I can post that and get that out to you ladies and to everyone out there.
Thank you. Just as a quick aside, it was about 20 years ago that I approached my HR person. It's a company I haven't worked for in over a decade, but at the time I really felt that some of the conversations would be helpful for people. You know, whether it was people of color, but also I know that there are a lot of gender issues in workplaces still, even in 2020. And it was the HR VP basically, I'm not going to say she laughed in my face, but in so many words, she laughed in my face and basically said, we're here in the greater DC area. This is such a diverse region. We don't need that kind of training. We don't need that kind of conversation, because we're cosmopolitan. Everybody understands it. And that's just, she called it a soft skill, or she actually referred to it as a pink skill. And what that did was it basically shut me down from, feeling that I could approach her about just about any issue. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, and unfortunate, very unfortunate.
Yes.
So that's, as HR, we should be the champions and leading and paving the path, because again, everybody's on a different journey, and we need to make sure that we're being inclusive and that we're hearing the voice of the customer. Employees are our customers just as leaders in the organization itself. So I appreciate you sharing that insight too, because it's important. It's important to hear these messages.
Thank you.
Yes. Hi, Tiffany and Suman.
Hi, I was just going to pick on you.
No. I would love to have a copy of that article if you can find it. I'm a recruiter for Manpower, so I recruit people of all colors and everything like that. So, I never even really thought about if somebody asked me that question about if I should put my civil duties on my resume, and that kind of stuff. We should put protesting and that information. So that would be really helpful for me. I'm kind of in the beginning of this journey. I grew up in a very white privileged neighborhood. So, and I kind of have the thinking of I've never treated anybody against their skin color or anything like that. So because I think that way, I don't notice when people are being treated poorly unless it's, blatantly obvious. So I never really realized what the white privilege was all about, and I'm just now realizing it, through what has been happening in the world and stuff like that. And I'm just trying to get as much information and educate myself as much as possible as how to deal with, different situations. I did recently have a client that I felt racist, and every African-American candidate I would submit to her, she would turn down and not give me any information about why she didn't want to interview them. But all other candidates, she would give me feedback or she would interview them. But it's only if this person had an African-American name, they would be rejected. And I didn't really know how to handle that situation just because I'm not at that role or level to say, well, we don't want you as a client anymore. I'm just a recruiter. So, I have to kind of support what our branch manager or what our branch says, this is our client. But it got to the point where, I had to say, I don't feel comfortable working for this client anymore. And if you want to keep them as our client, you're going to have another recruiter work for them, because I don't feel like this is fair, and I don't know how else to work with this person. So I'm just kind of trying to educate myself and gather as much information as I can on how to help promote this change, and just making sure that I'm staying on top of everything, and in communicating with my candidates and associates, and in the right manner. So I thank you both for leading this topic and having these discussions, because I think it's really important. And a lot of times I'm afraid, as a white person, I don't know how to present some of this stuff, and I don't want to offend somebody, even though I think that I could be ignorant on some topics. So it's always hard for me to even approach the situation because I'm afraid to offend somebody. So this stuff is very helpful. And thank you, Tiffany, for inviting.
Of course. Thanks for joining. Kelly's my very good friend.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, those are good points, Kelly. And I think, back to what Suman said, it does start at the hiring and even the pre-hiring stage. We need to do outreach in the communities as employers as well, so that we are bringing in a diverse pool. And kudos to you for saying something to your employer and using your voice to say, I'm not okay with this. And you rose it to the level that it needed to get to. So even if you don't have the authority within your role, we still have the ability to influence and to have authority without a title. I'm a huge advocate for that too. And so I think it's very important versus you just keeping that inside and this client continuing to do this. Because let's be honest, there are stereotypes, people judge names. I know people in the professional and personal world who have changed their name to put it on, maybe they're from Europe and their name sounds different, or they know that they're going to be discriminated against, and we should never be in that place. But that's what's going on out there. That's the reality. People are being told to strip down their resumes of those civic duties and things of that nature, their volunteer or church affiliations, and we just shouldn't be in that place. It's not inclusive. It's not how you attract and engage and retain the right individuals in your organization. So I think we just have to continue to have conversations, and it is very important.
Yeah, and I agree. So when I first started out in the workforce, I'm about to age myself, this is decades and decades ago, someone recommended that I change my name from Suman to Sue. They said, Suman it says too much. No one's going to look at your resume because they can't pronounce your name. And then they're going to feel uncomfortable trying to schedule an interview with you because they're going to be afraid of mispronouncing your name. And I said, but this is who I am. I'm not a Sue. My name is Suman. It's not difficult. And I would rather that someone try to say my name and pronounce my name, and then I can just respectfully correct them. So this is definitely, Tiffany, something that's been going on for decades, the whole change your name. Kelly, I applaud you to even just go to your higher ups and say you can't work with this individual. I applaud you for coming to the conversation and wanting to have these conversations. They're definitely very scary. They put everyone involved, I think even I know at least for me as a person of color, even there are times where I am sitting in my discomfort. So that's a huge step, that you are acknowledging where you are, and you're acknowledging where you want to go, and you're acknowledging the challenges that you're having. So I commend you for all of that. I think it's great. I also believe that, yes, I think Tiffany and I talked about the conversation where your question where you said you were afraid to offend. It's going to happen, right? Let's just put it out there. At some point in some conversation, you will offend somebody. And that doesn't mean that it's consciously done. It's just part of the journey, right? It's a part of sitting in that discomfort. I think it's a learning process. So if you do offend an individual, it's a matter of taking the time to do some self-reflection. Was your question asked in the appropriate way at the appropriate time? Have you done enough work on yourself? Are you reading the books? Are you journaling? Are you doing that heavy, deep self-reflection? Not, what are your unconscious biases? Are you digging really deep into what that all looks like? I think with all of that work that you're doing, and then having the conversations, it's the approach, right? Again, like we were talking with Jennifer, I've done this work, or, I'm now at this point in my journey and I have a question, and I'd love if you can find some time for us to have a conversation, because I'm stuck. I don't know where else to go in my journey. And do you have time for us to have a conversation? I think if you put it that way, of course, yes, someone can still say no, because it depends on where they are in their journey, but it opens that door for conversation. I urge you to continue working and not be afraid to have the conversation, because it is only through that discomfort that the change will come. You have Tiffany as a resource. I hope you will look at me as a resource as well now, and a friend of Tiffany's is a friend of mine. And I have to put a shout out. Jennifer is my BFF from grad school. So, I think if we create our support group and we have these conversations, it really helps us learn how to move through that discomfort. So if there are conversations you want to have that you feel, okay, I can learn a lot, but how do I approach it? Reach out to Tiffany or to me. And we are more than happy to have that conversation privately, or again, in one of these forums, and hopefully guide you through what a potential non-offensive conversation would look like. Because again, whoever you have the conversation with could be at a different point in their journey.
Right. Oh, great. Because it also includes the LGTB group as well. And that's, I'm seeing a lot of those different people coming through. So it's kind of might be, Tiffany might be needed and might have to lean on you and get your advice on, different topics on that as well.
Yeah, please do. You know where to find me.
Sure do.
I wonder, Kelly, and Tiffany too, here's a question that I have. I wonder if it's appropriate as a recruiter to ask clients what their corporate culture looks like when it comes to race and to gender. And I know they're going to have a PAN statement, well, we are all-inclusive employee, equal opportunity employer. I understand all that, but I'm wondering if there's a way to dive deeper and to understand what does their makeup look like right now, right? So while everyone puts those equal opportunity employer statements on the bottom of every job description and anywhere you look, but is it possible for you to see what does their company look like presently? And then that kind of gives you a sense of where they're coming from. I mean, if it's a predominantly white organization, well, then you kind of have a sense of where they're coming from. And then what does that discussion look like, right? And I don't know if it's appropriate as a recruiter or someone in the HR world to have a conversation to say, hey, so, what's your corporate culture look like? Are you looking for diversity? And if you are, here's some, regardless, but here are some great candidates that could help you increase that diversity. And again, not looking at it from the perspective of, affirmative action, or I need to have more color in my thing, but genuinely, what does their corporate culture look like as far as people of color are concerned? I don't know how that looks like from a recruiter standpoint.
Right. No, that's a good idea. I actually sit on site on my main client. So kind of what my main focus is getting to know different hiring managers and kind of sitting with them and trying to learn kind of, we live in a world of, it is human bias, when you are working with hiring managers, and even if the corporation has, clauses or guidelines around different things, you're dealing with people and people. So, each hiring manager also comes with their own set of beliefs, and even though they're not supposed to, base it on that, it's human nature to do that. So, I kind of, being on site, I try to get to know some of our hiring managers and see what kind of teams they have, how they run their teams, kind of their personalities, maybe a little bit on their backgrounds, their family lives, and that kind of stuff. And that kind of helps me with knowing what kind of candidates would be successful in that department. But it's just different when I had a candidate that was male at one time and is now female. So it's kind of, and if that person didn't get a job, is it, I don't want to go in there thinking, oh, you didn't get the job because they didn't understand that he looks like a male but he's really a female. It's kind of so just kind of trying to learn everything and kind of educate myself and how to handle different situations.
Yeah. And I think you're doing what you need to do. And that's one of those things. That's a great point about, what does that look like for an organization? Because even though they're your client, you could bear some liability based on their practices, or it could, reflect poorly on you, and you don't want that. And so I think being an advocate for situations like that, and we're seeing more transgender folks come into the workplace, and I've experienced it in HR and have had these conversations with leaders and employees and helping talk through and manage expectations which aren't always aligned, or people don't know what their rights are as an employer, or the employer doesn't understand what they can and cannot say. And so it becomes very sticky at times, but those conversations need to continue to happen too. We can't just stick an EEO statement on our job descriptions and think that and call it a day. Back to strategy. What are you really doing? What is the makeup of your team, and what is best positioning them for success? So great points, Kelly. Thank you for being so candid.
Yes. All right, guys, I want to be mindful of time. I hope we've addressed everyone's questions, at least for today. I know Tiffany and I plan to be back. We will let everyone know when our next session will be. But I thought this was great. Thank you, Jennifer and Kelly, for coming with your amazing questions. Thank you for such a dynamic conversation. I've definitely learned some stuff, so that's been really good as well. Tiffany and I think it's great that we are also learning, and that's the whole point of this, is that while we are experts in our fields, even with it as an expert, we are still learning. So this was a great conversation. I hope the next time we go live that you all will continue joining us. And if not, at least catch it on the replay. So anything else, Tiffany, you wanted to add?
Just that I dropped our little business cards into the chat. So those will be available now if you want to grab those to download, as well as it should be in the recording as well. So definitely appreciate everyone's time. Kelly and Jennifer, thank you so much for adding so much to the conversation and just rich dialogue. I really appreciate it. And just being honest and vulnerable, because we all are in a vulnerable place. And thanks for taking your time, and to everyone who's going to listen to the replay. Suman, thanks for being amazing, and my partner here. I really appreciate you too.
Same here, Tiffany. Couldn't do it without you.
Thank you both so much.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right, stay safe. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.